invite on stage Bénédicte Peillon-Russo and Sigyn Jónsdóttir. They come from NATIVA and respectively Alda. And we are going to have a little conversation here. Before we start that, I would like to give you opportunities to say like 1 or 2 words about where you come from. So let's start with you, Bénédicte.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I come from, or I live in Rome, and NATIVA is an Italian company based between Europe and Brazil, actually. And what we do is we accompany businesses in their transformation towards regenerative paradigms. But we understand that doing that will never happen if it happens in silo alone. So we very much look at how can we, say, ecosystem shake, shake the environment in which companies evolve so that they can thrive as more regenerative businesses.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I'm so happy to be here on stage with such experts like yourselves. So I'm Sigyn, I'm the CTO and co-founder of Alda. We're an Icelandic startup company, and we're focusing on using data and technology to improve workplace cultures by focusing on how the culture affects people and their performance.
And I already introduced myself. So we are going to not have so much a panel as a little discussion. Let's just imagine that we live in the same apartment building and we ran into each other in the stairway and we just decided to have a little chat. And you get to listen to that chat, as you do. So, how are you today?
Good, right? So happy to be here, so happy to see you.
Great, so happy to see you as well. Fun running into you.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I wanted to ask you a very light and easy question. What are the trends that we are seeing when it comes to the synergy between businesses and well-being and sustainability as well? Because we're focusing on this sort of geopolitical landscape that we're seeing, where we're seeing quite aggressive rollbacks from the US when it comes to DEI, and we're seeing legislation in the EU not sort of getting the flight that we thought it would get, and so on. So what are the trends that we're seeing among companies? You work very much with companies, hands-on, so what are we seeing?
It's just a general, really light hallway question to ask your neighbor.
Exactly.
Love it. No, so it's quite an interesting paradox I think we're living in right now. So on one hand, we have the US-based kind of aggressively against DEI initiatives and all of that. And on the other hand, then we have businesses who work globally and want to retain talent and are not backing away for any social responsibility or sustainability at all. They may be adjusting it a bit or reframing it, but they're not abandoning it. And like for Alda, our US-based customers, they are not backing out of any inclusion initiatives. They're maybe not using the term DEI for what they're doing. They're using well-being, they're reframing it, but the work is still being done. And in Europe and the rest of the world, there's also kind of like everyone is just watching all of this unfold, it's pretty dramatic. So companies are being cautious, but they're also realizing that if exclusion is going to become a liability for US companies, there's a competitive advantage being created in inclusion, in DEI. So there's a huge opportunity for commitment to DEI and inclusion and well-being, that it's not only now kind of the compliance or the values that we hold so dearly, but also risk mitigation strategies. And I feel like because we do inclusion measurements in Iceland and globally at Alda, we are seeing here in Iceland, in the well-being society we're all talking about, we're seeing gaps in inclusion. Like members of the queer community feel like their identity harms their career. They're 50% more likely than people who are not members of the queer community. And disabled people in Iceland, they are 3 times more likely than non-disabled persons to get bullied at work. So this is the status in a well-being economy like in Iceland. So what's going on in other economies where we're not measuring these things? And this is just like the synergy we need to think about. You can't have either well-being or inclusion. You need to have both. And if you're not going to focus on both, you're just going to create like surface level sustainability and create maybe even deeper social fractures.
Yeah, so if I can give also a European perspective, because you were talking about the latest regulation shifts that we've had in Europe as the EU has decided to put competitivity and the green economy and sustainability together, and this is what has driven to the omnibus decision. Whilst before that we had a very strong kind of requirement, which is called the CSRD, for transparency in the EU on companies and how they perform on certain data points in measuring their social and environmental KPIs. But it was a very big piece of work that the EU was asking, because you had up to over 1,000 pieces of data points and companies weren't really used to kind of doing that piece of work. But actually, now that Omnibus has pushed that back, we see that actually companies had already started to get to the knowledge of incorporating these elements, so they're not stopping despite the fact that it's not a legal need for them to actually report. We see that companies still want to use the extra time they have to actually put the right governance processes, to put the right frameworks and diffused ownership, I would say, within the organization in order to not only measure those data points, and a lot of them have done that, but also progress on them, be more performant on them. So I think in general, this is a really good trend that we're seeing in the EU. But there are a lot of different models actually that exist for purpose-driven organizations. In Italy, for example, we were the first country that brought the benefit corporation model, which is a model, it's a legal framework that's available in 50 jurisdictions worldwide. And basically it says that companies can put in their articles of association a purpose which is different from the profit driving, right? So you can choose the social and or environmental objectives that the company wants to pursue as much as they pursue the economic one. And so we did a research, because actually in Italy that, for example, would be the #1 company in Italy, because it would represent, if you take all the 5,000 companies that are benefit corporation, it would represent 70 billion in terms of revenue. So it's starting to be pretty substantial, right? Yeah. And we can see that KPIs are substantially higher on benefit corporations versus non-benefit corporations on economic, social, and environmental KPIs. So I think that we should shift also on talking about needing companies to build in resilience and all that, which is a bit mechanical, but it's actually creating value. So that leads me to a question I want to ask the both of you, actually, because you're Icelanders and we're talking about a well-being economy, and that's what you're trying to thrive and be a laboratory for that innovation in the world. And I think your president this morning, Haltra, was saying we need to not work in silos, and that has been something that has been really working off in my mind and with some colleagues of mine, and Lorenzo, who's here with us today as well. It's like, okay, we have models that exist of companies that work well, and we had 2 amazing examples before that have built a critical mass. It's not innovation anymore. We have early adopters, and we're moving to an early majority curve, right? So it's how do we further scale those programs, those business models that are more comprehensive and create value to do systemic change, because all of these companies are actually choosing their own strategy, right, for their own business, and they create value. Great. But how does that work systemically with what, for example, Iceland has decided for itself in terms of key material topics, key data points, key elements for its well-being economy? And how can we make sure that the two actually converge, right? So we're not fragmented, but we're systemic in the approach. What do you guys think on how we could handle that?
Yeah. Elva, would you like to start?
So I think when it comes to Iceland, because I think we do make a lot of excuses because of our size all the time, and I think many other small countries could relate to that. So we have to completely stop that, all of us, because I hear the same thing from like every other nation out there. I heard an innovator say in Germany, like, oh, it's so hard to be an innovator in Germany, we're so small. And I was like, boo-hoo, like you're so small. So I think that every nation uses this to their advantage when they want to. So stop doing that. Just we can do a lot of things. We can punch above our weight. I also think that we need to be careful not to take things for granted. Like we have, like you're saying, we do have a society in Iceland that most would call a well-being society, but it's being challenged, and it's being challenged everywhere. So we shouldn't, lean back and think we've got this already. We need to be systemic and working with it continuously. So this is like an Icelandic setting, but I think that in general, what I feel in my work with our NGO, Festa, is that people, when I talk to the CEOs or the specialists or whoever in the companies, they crave connection to other people. They crave discussion, and they crave that discussion, within the business life and from the business life to the government. So the communication is always something that we have to, we cannot forget how important that is to people, to try to understand the other side. So I think that is at the foundation. And then just to drive systemic change. I mean, this is also a systemic change, by the way. Facilitating conversation can be very systemic, or the lack of. But I think we always have to think about how are we using the money correctly, and what do the owners want? So you have the owners of the companies. It can be the board, or it can be the shareholders, or whoever. Where is the pressure coming from on what the manager can actually do? So the manager might have excellent ideas, they might have excellent ambitions, but if they don't have the backup of the shareholders, and to be able to then use the money in towards well-being, towards all these things, it's not going to happen. So if you do have companies that are only thinking about all the quarterlies, and they're only thinking about only profit, it's going to be really hard. Even if you have excellent specialists, you have all the knowledge within the management systems, if you don't have the backup from the money and the ownership, it's not going to work. So I think that would be the way to drive systemic change.
I think it's also, it's a great point, and I love the question. It's really at the heart of what's missing in a lot of national policies. It's around the role of companies and role of business in driving change or systemic change. And having a conversation on a systemic shift without including businesses in the conversation is just like changing a system without including half of the system.
Yeah.
So we really need some collaboration there, and I think that organizations need to realize that they are having an impact on well-being without them knowing it or wanting it, because the data I was talking about earlier, if there's an inclusion gap that I'm talking about, it's not only societal, it's workplace realities, it's our everyday lives. So
they're the same humans in the end, right?
Exactly.
It's just something
it's
working.
just part of what we're doing. And I think, businesses need to make a decision, to be drivers of well-being, and the governments also need to meet them, halfway at least, in creating the conditions for that to happen.
Yeah, amazing. So really nice running into you here in the stairway.
We learned so much.
Yeah,
let's change these things, right?
This is what we talk about all the time when we meet up here. Sure.
We have this conversation in the hallway. Yeah.
You're lucky where you live, I'm sure. So I just want to sum this up and say that this morning we heard a lot about courage and hope and how to be instead of doing. And I think that when it comes to business leaders, the more, I'm generalizing a little bit, but the more influential you are and the more sort of in the spotlight you are and the more successful you are, it becomes even harder, I think, to show the courage to shift your energy publicly. Some people do it privately. I know a lot of business leaders that are super into yoga, do a lot of things, but when they come out publicly in the spotlight, they don't show that side of themselves. So I think it takes a lot of courage to do that. So we should definitely applaud those that do and try to sort of encourage others to do that as well. And in business, we focus a lot on doing, right? So I thought that from this morning was excellent. We need to be able to do, but to be able to do, we also need to be. And I'm just going to repeat what Halla said this morning, that hope is a verb. So let's do hope. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's great. Thank you.